With Coptic Solidarity, and happy to be here. My second year. I appreciate it. They're covering for me while I was trying to make it down here from Toronto this morning. So, anyway, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, actually. Congressman French Hill is here with us. He is Arkansas's 2nd Congressional District, 9th generation Arkansan. He began his first congressional term in January 2015. He serves on the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services. Prior to his congressional service, Mr. Hill was actively engaged in the Arkansas business community for 2 decades as a commercial banker and investment manager. He was founder, chairman, and CEO of Delta Trust and Banking Corporation. Prior to his community banking work in Arkansas, Mr. Hill served as a senior official in the administration of President George H.W. Bush. From 1989 until 1991, Mr. Hill served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Corporate Finance, where one of his key assignments was representing the United States as a negotiator in historic bilateral talks with Japan. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, Mr. Hill led the design of U.S. technical assistance to the emerging economies of Eastern and Central Europe in areas of banking and securities. In 1991, at the age of 34, President Bush appointed Mr. Hill to be Executive Secretary to the President's Economic Policy Council, where he coordinated all White House economic policy. For his leadership and service at the Treasury and the White House, Mr. Hill was awarded the Distinguished Service Award by the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Nicholas Brady, in January 1993. And prior to his executive branch service from 1982 until 1984, Mr. Hill served on the staff of then U.S. Senator John Tower, Republican from the great state of Texas, as on the staff of the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. In 2013, he was named the Top Manager of the Year by the Sales and Marketing Executive International. And in 2010, he was elected by AY Magazine as its most powerful man in business in Arkansas. Mr. Hill is a magna cum laude graduate in economics from Vanderbilt University. He is married to the former Martha McKenzie of Dallas, Texas, and they have a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth McKenzie Hill, and a son, William Payne Hill. And the Hill family resides in Little Rock, Arkansas. Please help me welcome Congressman French Hill.
In the culture of the Southwest United States, it's very risky to have a cross-border relationship an Arkansan marrying a Texan. But my kids are half Texan. When they were born at St. Vincent's Hospital in Little Rock, their mother made sure there was a cigar box under the birthing bed that had Texas dirt from the Alamo. So I appreciate the chance to be with you, and thank you so much for that warm introduction. It is a pleasure to join my colleagues, including my friend Dave Trott, being here to support the efforts of the Coptic community to have their story told and told thoroughly here in our nation's capital. So I'm gratified that you invited me to come by and provide some remarks. You know, in the 2nd chapter of Matthew, the Lord comes to Joseph and says, "Man, you need to get the heck out of there. King Herod's after you." And that flight to Egypt is such a great part of the traditions of our Christian faith and the roots of Christ's visit to Egypt and the roots of the Coptic Church and St. Mark's future evangelism in Egypt, and all that brings home true the deep relationship that Christians around the world share with our Coptic brothers and sisters. When I was in Cairo in February, it was a rare privilege and an honor for us to meet with the Pope of the Coptic Orthodox Church, and I found that such an inspirational visit. He told us, and I'm sure he said this many, many times in Egypt, for American consumption, we really appreciated his remarks. And he's famous for having said, we will pray in the mosques, in the churches, and if they destroy the churches, we'll pray in the mosques. And if they destroy the mosques, we'll pray in the streets. And certainly all of us took that to heart and appreciated the Pope's deep passion and faith for protecting religious freedom in Egypt. He also took something that struck with me that I took home with me. He says, Egyptians take two things from the Nile: water and a moderate attitude. And that's where I think we have a lot more work to do. I was pleased to see, I'm a Catholic, so I was pleased to see Pope Francis visit Egypt. And I sure agree with his statement. Let us say once more a firm and clear no to every form of violence, vengeance, and hatred carried out in the name of religion or in the name of God. And I appreciate President El-Sisi in making the gestures that he has towards Copts and Protestants by attending Mass with the Coptic Pope on 2 occasions. As you've heard in Washington this week, words matter. But attacks on Copts outside Cairo and the countryside are still, I think, an immense challenge to Egypt. And those victims rarely are seeing any form of justice. So I would hope that President El-Sisi would make an example of security for Egyptian Christians by ending this culture of impunity and persecution, particularly outside the metropolitan region of Cairo. Further, while the President and the Pope pointed to concrete steps, good steps, towards changes in schooling for Egyptian students, particularly young students, we still need more there. We still need more changes towards acceptance at the primary and secondary school level, and more work to be done there. On behalf of the United States, we're proud of the work that President Trump has done in reestablishing the functioning, working, quality, two-way relationship with the people of Egypt and the government of Egypt. And I think that was made quite clear in the President's recent trip to the Middle East, and quite clear in the warm and cordial meeting here in Washington between President El-Sisi and President Trump. But another area that has a long history in Egypt that we all need to do better on is in the area of non-governmental organizations and their role in civil society in Egypt. I'm a Rotarian, so I'm a third-generation Rotarian here in the United States. So my grandfather, after World War II in Little Rock, welcomed young students from Europe as a part of the Marshall Plan in to live and work in Little Rock as a part of Rotary's outreach there in his club. My dad was a Rotarian. I am currently one, a past president of the Rotary Club. And my daughter, Liza, who's down at the University of Texas at Austin. The Aggies in the family lost. The Razorbacks in the family lost. She's a Longhorn. She's been involved in Rotary as a young person. So she's the fourth generation in our family to believe in the four-way test of Rotarians. But you know, Egypt was the first country in the Middle East to have a Rotary Club. The Rotary Club went to Cairo in 1929 and was a part of a great tradition in Cairo of welcoming traditions that were from outside Egypt. And so I hope that we can all recognize that there are very valuable resources of our non-governmental organizations that are doing good things around the world, doing good things in Egypt. And let's just take that as an anchor point, that Rotary was welcomed to Egypt in 1929, and Rotary's humanitarian work around the world is unsurpassed. So I hope that the El-Sisi government will continue to balance and look for ways to support NGOs working in Egypt that are legitimate and carry out a caring mission that's complementary of what needs to happen in making Egyptian society all that it can be. For the Americans and the Egyptians, maintaining a working relationship with Egypt is essential to solve the crisis in Libya, tackle the issues of terror finance, and helping Egypt further develop its economy. The best thing we can all do in the United States and our business community is engage with Egypt for its strategic location and economic benefits to help grow that economy, offer future career opportunities to Egyptians, and a growing, better Egyptian economy is better for Christians in Egypt and better for Muslims in Egypt. So it's a great opportunity for Egypt also in the world, in this conversation that we're now having about the Middle East of the future, because we are losing an ecumenical, tolerant view in Turkey, and that makes Egypt all the more important to play its historic role in having an ecumenical, tolerant, and economically advanced viewpoint for the people of Egypt. So it's an honor to be with you today. Thanks for letting me come by and make some remarks. I appreciate your advocacy on Capitol Hill for the plight of our Christian brothers and sisters in Egypt. Know that we stand with you in Congress for religious tolerance, religious freedom, and that all across the Levant and in Egypt, we want the diversity of religion that has made the Middle East the healthy, economically successful, and beautiful place it's been for millennia. And we just won't tolerate this destruction of that rich faith tradition across the Middle East. And God bless you, and thank you for your work here today.
I'm glad to meet a fellow Rotarian here in Congress. Our next speaker we have Congressman Dave Tribe, the Republican representative of Michigan, representing Michigan's 11th congressional district. Republican Trot is a congressional leader in seeking to protect Coptic Christians in Egypt and help them achieve equality. Thank you very much. Dave has met with Egyptian religious, private sector, and government leaders, and as a member of the Friends of Egypt caucus, he has been committed to improving the relationship between the USA and Egypt. In the previous session of Congress, he invited Father Mina to lead the House of Representatives in prayer. The first time a Coptic priest did that in American history. It was an honor. Dave received his Bachelor of Arts from the University of Michigan and his Juris Doctor from Duke University. His wife, KP, of 25 years, and his 3 children live in Birmingham, Michigan. Welcome on board.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak at your annual conference, and it's a privilege to follow French Hill. You know, I have to tell you, I was elected with French in 2014, and I enjoyed listening to his remarks this morning, and I think French really just personifies, it's almost as if he's been in government for many, many years, because he just strikes me as already a statesman among us, and it's a pleasure to serve with him. Again, it's an honor to be here today, especially at such an important time in the U.S.-Egypt relationship. You know, for over 2,000 years since St. Mark brought Christianity to Egypt, the Copts have been ingrained in the cultural and social fabric of Egypt. In fact, the Copts' name is derived from the Greek word for Egypt, which is Egyptos. Unfortunately, the Coptic Christians are now facing some of their most challenging times in their history. While it's true that the attacks are attacks on all of Egypt, I want to be clear in saying that the attacks specifically are aimed at the Coptic Christians. Terrorist groups have made a point to specifically mention the Coptic Christians in their recruitment videos, and they are wreaking havoc on Egypt's Christian population. Egypt is facing a legitimate insurgency from terrorists, but the Copts have been subject to a disproportionate amount of the violence. That is a fact. I'm encouraged by President Sisi's positive statements, a state funeral that he gave to the Coptic martyrs, the multiple airstrikes he's launched in retaliations to the attacks, how he's repeatedly challenged the religious establishment in Egypt. These are all good things. In addition to conducting swift investigations to find the culprits behind the attacks, President Sisi has stood with the Copts in church, celebrating Christmas with them, and has followed through on his promise to repair all of the churches that were destroyed by the Muslim Brotherhood in 2013. President Sisi should be applauded for these actions as they are unprecedented in Egypt's history. However, more needs to be done, especially at a time when Coptic Christians are being targeted by terrorists. In his speeches, he regularly mentions that all Egyptians are equal and that the terrorists are trying to divide the fabric of Egypt through these attacks. He is absolutely correct that that is the aim of the terrorists, and the Egyptian government should do everything possible to stop the terrorists. Since the Copts are facing a disproportionate amount of violence, they should also be part of the solution. I repeat, the Copts need to be part of the solution. As President Sisi says, Egyptians have to stand together now more than ever, and a great first step would be to show the terrorists that all Egyptians are unified in their resolve. The Egyptians could show the terrorists that they mean what they say by placing more Copts in high-level security positions in intelligence, military, and local security forces, as Copts are almost currently non-existent in these positions. I was elated to see Secretary Mattis visit Cairo earlier this year, but you know what else was great about that visit? Right next to Secretary Mattis was his Deputy National Security Advisor, Dina Powell, a Coptic Christian. The United States stands strong next to Egypt in their fight to combat terrorism, but the Egyptians should realize that many of the solutions are right in their own backyard. George Washington University did a study on the Copts, and you won't believe what they found. Almost 9 out of the 10 Copts who responded to the survey had a college degree. 45% of those people had advanced degrees. Over 50% of the households had incomes in excess of $100,000, almost 1/5 in excess of $200,000. Despite all that success, there was one stat that really stood out. 95% of the people that responded to the survey said that the future of Egypt was still important to them. So despite all of their success and the stability in the United States, although we have our own challenges, they are still deeply concerned and committed to what's going on in Egypt. The Copts are deeply patriotic people that love their country. However, they need an appropriate avenue to serve. I'm proud to represent a vibrant Coptic community in Southeast Michigan, and I'll continue to work with the Egyptian government to address the divisions that currently undermine our mutual goals. While I know the road and the solutions will be tough, I have already established strong relationships with the Egyptian ambassador here in Washington and regularly meet with their ministers and members of parliament, including as recently as this week. The Egyptian people are as determined as anyone, and I know they have the will to fight the Muslim Brotherhood and other terrorist groups. Egypt is the center of the Arab world and has a unique role to play in combating the region's challenges. I have profound respect for the resolve and the grit of the Egyptian people, and I am confident that Egypt will continue to work towards the peace and the stability that their citizens deserve. I promise, and I will be honored to stand with them on this most worthwhile journey. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Moving along, we have Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, a Republican from the great state of Nebraska, with us, representing the 1st District. Congressman Fortenberry represents Nebraska's 1st Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He is a member of the House of Appropriations Committee which is responsible for the expenditures of the United States government. He serves on 3 subcommittees with importance for our national and economic security: Energy and Water, Military Construction and Veterans Affairs, and State and Foreign Operations. In Congress, he serves as co-chair of the Nuclear Security Working Group, co-chair of the Caucus on Religious Minorities in the Middle East, and co-chair of the Congressional Study Group on Europe. Congressman Fortenberry has sponsored several key bills leading efforts for the U.S. government to call the annihilation of minority communities in Iraq and Syria as a genocide. He's one of the foremost supporters in Congress of religious minorities in the Middle East. Please welcome Congressman Fortenberry.
Hi everyone, Sabah al-Khair. Ahlan wa sahlan. Thank you all for the kind invite. When was it we last spoke? When was the last time we gathered across the street? So when was it? July? June last year. So I've been to Cairo since then. So I want to tell you a few stories. First of all, in 1979, and some of you heard me say this before, but I want to repeat it. It was a tremendously formative event for me. This was the year in which 2 major things happened. The biggest one, of course, was there was a peace agreement signed between Egypt and Israel, a peace agreement that has held now for decades. Sometimes cold, sometimes more vibrant, but nonetheless has held. There is a roadmap for peace in the Middle East, and it's because 2 courageous countries took leadership to move past differences and to try to embrace a new way at great, great price. The other significant event that happened that year was I was a young college student and I entered the Sinai Desert. And on a twisted pile of concrete and rubble, which had been the site of fighting in the 1973 war, there were the words in both Arabic and English spray painted. Here was the war, here is the peace. I think Egypt, and by extension, Egyptian nationals, and by extension, the culture of the Copts and the Christian minorities, by participating in the larger initiatives of Egypt, both there and from afar, have a decided role in bringing about the construct for future peace in the Middle East. You see, if we lose completely the concept of pluralism, that religious minorities can possibly coexist side by side other faith traditions and be integrated into governance structures, be protected with the rights to religious freedom, if we can continue to build upon that foundation in Egypt and affirm that principle throughout the Middle East, then the Middle East has a chance. If we cannot, if Egypt collapses, if the prospects for pluralism in the name of justice, respect for individual dignity, and the rights of conscience as it finds expression in religious freedom dies, then people will just default back to tribal, ethnic, religious allegiance, and there is no prospect for healthy governance and mutual respect. This is why I believe what you're doing is absolutely so critical. First of all, being great Americans and remaining attached to the ancient faith tradition that gives narrative and binding to your community, that continues to compel you to engage significantly in the future, not only of Egypt's stability, but in the future of the entire Middle East, which is essential for the future of humanity. Without stabilization in the Middle East, without some degree of embrace of the principles of pluralism, we undermine the principles of civilization itself. I just had this conversation just a few minutes ago with representatives of the Egyptian government. And I'll tell you, look, there is a lot of misunderstanding as to where Egypt is today in terms of its own society, in terms of its potential restoration of its rightful place as a leader in Middle Eastern affairs and the world, because of the instability of the last few years. But when President Sisi goes on television and he says, with Pope Tewodros next to him and the Grand Imam, we are Egyptians. That is not only a very courageous thing for Egypt's president to do, but it affirms this principle of pluralism and healthy nationalism, which is a significant challenge in the Middle East. Now, I recognize there is need for progress, just as Congressman Trott so thoughtfully laid out a few minutes ago. But I think we have some foundation in which to rebuild that progress. And that's what I want to focus on. The second issue I want to tell you is simply thank you. The communities in exile, the diaspora community of Egyptians, of Syrians, of Chaldeans, of Iraqis, of others who come from minority religious faith traditions in the Middle East have recognized, particularly in America, that there is a set of transcendent values here that need our aggregation, that need our unity. I have never seen a time when the patriarchal tradition, the apostolic community in the Middle East now gets together in the same room, because the threat of genocide, the threat of loss of the ancient faith tradition, the threat of any type of stability and future for your people and ours in the Middle East is under such dire threat. So whether or not we had a difference at the Council of Ephesus or at one of the later councils, I'm sorry, Council. Thank you. We'll deal with that, but we have to deal with that in peace. And peace comes about through governance structures that actually affirm the fundamental principles of justice, and again, human dignity and rights of conscience, which find its expression in religious freedom. So by coming together, along with other faith traditions, and participating in other good organizations like In Defense of Christians, for instance, we are recognizing that together in unity, as in the aggregate, we can help create the conditions which we all long for in the Middle East, and along the way, help people of other faith traditions, particularly those who long for the same principle of justice, but because of the fracturing that has happened and the disaster across the region, is now under such grave threat. So if there is any light in this darkness, I think it is this. The community is finding communion. We are finding unity. We are coming together as a force multiplier in the name of humanitarian interests, in the name of justice, in the name of what is true and good and right and beautiful, and I think that invites other people to participate with us. Further empowering a man like President Sisi to say, we are Egyptians, taking a significant risk in doing so to his own political well-being. So, last point. Last year, we had an extraordinary thing happen. The House of Representatives, in a unanimous vote, as we discussed previously in our June meeting, passed the genocide resolution. And on international television, I was challenged. So what? It's just a word. So what? And I got a little bit mad about it. Perhaps I lost Christian charity. And I said, what do you mean, so what? When have you ever had a conversation about the ancient faith traditions of the Middle East, who are a part of the normalized fabric of society, who have provided not only the conditions for flourishing for their own people, but help and assistance to other religious minorities, including the Muslim population, providing professional classes of people that provide services and governance structures. You have never had a conversation about the contribution that these ancient faith traditions are making to the stabilization of their own societies. And now you have. For the first time, you're recognizing that. Secondly, the genocide resolution created a pathway for further policy considerations that create the conditions in which, again, not only the ancient faith traditions can be preserved, but that people who have had to flee, particularly in Syria and in Iraq, who are in exile nearby, have the potential right to return. If we can re-securitize with the international community, revitalize, and then repatriate those who have the opportunity and wish to potentially return. So again, there's another component to this. It's about the migration crisis that we're all so deeply worried about, which is related to the preservation of the great tradition and ultimately related to the possibility of pluralism, stabilization, and flourishing of the various societies of the Middle East. That's why all of this is so important. For you, it is about tradition. and keeping your faith tradition alive, and rightfully so, and mine as well. But it also is about the principles of civilization. That's what's at stake here. So thank you all so much for, again, inviting me to come back. I appreciate it. Again, I feel like in many ways, those of you who are first generation and have a heartfelt attachment to the ancient community in Egypt, I feel like in a certain sense you helped raise me. I'll leave you with this last story. Nermeen Riyadh, and many of you are friends with Nermeen, said to me last summer, she said, "Jeff, please come to Cairo, and we'd like to present you with an award on behalf of Coptic Christians for your work." I said, "Well, that's very generous, Nermeen, but that's complicated." I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have ever been able to tell Nermeen no? Not nobody. So guess who went to Cairo? I did. It not only was a beautiful interaction with your community, and Pope Tewodros received me very generously as well, but it turned out the meeting was probably the most packed 48 hours I've ever had. The meetings with the President, meetings with President Sisi, the Defense Ministry, the Finance Ministry, and others. I even went to Khan el-Khalili. I think that I stepped in the same hole in the narrow alleyway that I stepped in 40 years ago. Not much had changed. I looked back and saw, I said, I stepped in that hole 40 years ago. But to be able to reconnect there in a profound way through Nermeen's urging, through your urging, by creating conditions in which I could go, which again leveraged the trip for multiple other good outcomes. For that I'll be eternally grateful. Is Nermeen, are you here? Yeah. Where is she? Where is she? Where is she? She left?
She left.
I hope I didn't say something that offended her. Anyway, she did a beautiful job and continues to do a beautiful job back home. And I was given, I'm sorry, I'm telling too many stories, and I've got the senator and the congressman waiting. But one more quick one. In the meeting, in the beautiful celebration in Cairo that night, I was given a painting, which is in my office back home. And it was given to me by a young Muslim woman. And I think she's from Menya. And she said, "I didn't like Christians." She says, "but I didn't know why I didn't like Christians." And the mutual project they had, an art project with young Christian girls and young Muslim girls, she said, so all the Christian girls would go off and paint images of their scriptures, all the Muslim girls would go off and paint geometric designs, which is that part of their tradition. She said, I made a decision. I wanted to paint a Christian image. So she painted the Holy Family's flight into Egypt, and she gave it to me. Now this is a young woman who's veiled completely. I was so touched by this, I whispered to Nermeen. I said, "Can I hug her?" Or Nermeen said, "No, don't do that." But I told the young Egyptian Muslim girl, I said, "I want you to do one more thing for me. I want you to paint an Islamic image for me now and give it to me." And by the way, Pope Tewodros blessed that image of the Holy Family, which is now in my office. God bless you all. Thanks so much.
It's enjoyable, but we're running out of time, so we'll try to hurry. Next, we have Senator James Langford, Republican representative from Oklahoma. After serving 4 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, James was elected to the U.S. Senate to complete an unexpired term on November 4th, 2014, and re-elected to a full 6-year Senate term on November 8th, 2016. As chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Regulatory Affairs and Federal Management, Langford fights unnecessary and burdensome regulation and advocates for a more restrained federal government. Perfect. He has been a strong advocate and supporter of religious freedom for persecuted minorities during his time in the House and Senate. Personal faith, local decision-making, and opportunity for every person, regardless of their background, are core values for Senator Langford. Before his time in Congress from 1995 to 2009, James served as Director of Student Ministry at the Baptist Convention of Oklahoma and Director of the Falls Creek Youth Camp, the largest youth camp in the United States, with more than 51,000 individuals attending each summer. Please join me in welcoming the Senator Langford.
So I made a quick comment to Jeff Fortenberry when he stepped off. I said they're used to the senator going long, not the House member, the congressman, because the senators are notorious for talking on and on. I'll make just some brief comments to you. It's a pleasure to be back with you again. As we had the opportunity to be able to visit together last June, I got to tell you about some of the work that's already going on international trade at that time, and some of the things we were able to put in the Trade Promotion Authority bill to require religious liberty to be addressed every time we did any kind of economic engagement with another country. It's the first time ever to be able to do that. That is now being rolled out. I've had conversations with the new United States Trade Representative to make sure that when we do trade and economic negotiations, we're always including basic human rights, and it's specifically the issue of religious liberty. There's no reason that we should engage in a trade negotiation and not bring up the human rights and religious liberty issues. That's a basic American value, and it should be a basic right of every individual to be able to live out their faith in freedom and in peace. But I'll have to tell you, a few weeks ago, I was in Iraq and Syria for a few days, and visiting with some of the folks that were there on the ground. We changed planes in Doha, and as I changed planes in Doha, I looked up on the monitor, and all I could see was the image of a bus that had been shot, and 28 Coptic Christians being murdered on their way to go worship. And we stood in the airport around as a group and looked at the news and followed it. And all I could think was, again. This is an ongoing issue. It's been a long-term conversation. While Egypt has made great progress in statements, as Jeff Fortenberry was saying again, to be able to stand and say, we are all Egyptians, it's not the first time for President Sisi to be able to say that, and I'm glad he continues to reiterate that. But there's an ongoing work for both terrorism in Sinai and just basic dignity and protection of all individuals to be able to practice their faith and to be able to be considered a faithful citizen of a nation, regardless of the faith practice that you have. We still have a long way to go. I visited with Rex Tillerson, who's our Secretary of State, just yesterday, and had an ongoing conversation about where are we, because there's a position called the Ambassador at Large for Religious Liberty. That position has not been filled yet. The sole role of that individual is to be able to work with our State Department to make sure that all of our embassies have an ongoing conversation in country about religious liberty, and to be able to work with our other foreign ministers and with our own State Department, and to be able to travel the world with this one basic principle. How can people live in your country free, with dignity, with the same values, the same abilities, the same responsibilities as everyone else in your nation, and the same opportunities, regardless of their faith principles? That position's unfilled currently in the State Department. Secretary Tillerson told me that they have made the recommendation now to the White House. They're waiting on final response back, but they have finished their work, and within a very short period of time, we should have that ambassador's position filled, and we're looking forward to getting them back to work, to gain a chance to travel around the world and engaging with every government to be able to engage in those basic principles. That should be simple, but for whatever reason, it's been complicated. I would tell you as well what Congressman Fortenberry was mentioning before about pluralism. It's one of those things that I'm amazed when I get into an American dialogue. We talk about the Middle East, and immediately Americans begin to talk about in the Middle East, well, maybe we should partition areas off of countries. And this should be the area of this country for this faith or for this tradition, and this tradition should have this area, but that not go into this area, and then make it so much more peaceful. And I'll always smile at them and I'll say, do we need that in America? And they'll say, well, no, we don't need that in America. We have religious liberty in America. You can be whatever faith you want to in any place. And I would say, then why would we require other countries to do that? Why would we assume in other places religious dignity and religious liberty would not work, but it works here every day? Why would that be? So that simple challenge that you continue to bring, the simple reminder that you bring to Congress, just by being here, by you making the trip to come again, is beneficial. To remind every member of Congress and every person you interact with, religious liberty works here every day. Let's make that work everywhere, in every place, to be able to honor every faith as we do here. that should not be an American principle. That's a human rights and a dignity principle. Thanks for engaging us again. Thanks for not giving up on this. And let it be known, for the first time in history, a senator spoke shorter than a House member.
See you, Jim.
Okay, we have one final speaker, and he, Congressman Brad Sherman, is the only one that separates you from your lunch. I'm gonna put you under pressure.
Yeah, let the other guys go first, put the onus on me.
Congressman Sherman resides, or actually represents, the great state of California, from Sherman Oaks. He was born and raised in Southern California and represents California's San Fernando Valley. He has been in the U.S. House of Representatives since 1997 and now serving in his 11th term. Congratulations. Congressman Sherman is a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He serves as the ranking Democrat on the Subcommittee on Asia and the second ranking Democrat on the Subcommittee on Europe and Euro-Asia. Congressman Sherman is a chairman emeritus of the Subcommittee on Terrorism, Non-Proliferation, and Trade. He is also a senior member of the Financial Services Committee. Congressman Sherman is a champion of cops, for cops, and has consistently worked publicly and behind the scenes with Coptic Solidarity to support our mission. We are extremely grateful for all that he has done and for his continued support for our cause. Please help me welcome Congressman Sherman.
If you're getting hungry, say it's Sherman that's standing between. Blame the last two guys. I'm Brad Sherman from California's best named city, Sherman Oaks. It is a pleasure to be here with Dr. George and everyone, the entire board of Coptic Solidarity. I've served for over 20 years on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and when they came to me a decade ago and said, Sherman, we'd like to put you on the Ways and Means Committee, and everybody was celebrating, I said, no, I'm staying on Foreign Affairs. That's the center of fighting for human rights and justice and peace around the world. Of course, I visited and here St. Mary's and an atheist church in Northridge. Anybody here from the San Fernando Valley? Thanks for coming. And I thank you for being here. With me here, looking at his iPad, is Guido Weiss, my foreign policy advisor. He tells me he speaks Arabic. You can test him. No. But more importantly, give him your business card or email address, because consistent with the comment that I'm holding up lunch, I will abbreviate my remarks, and then you can get updates from us in the months to come. I know there's an issue about building churches in Egypt. We've had some success. It no longer requires a presidential okay. I think the rule should be the same as the San Fernando Valley. You can build a church as long as you have enough parking. That should be the only issue. That's why I was the chief Democrat on the Coptic Church Accountability Act that we introduced. Since then, I'm told that there's been a substantial improvement on the issue of building churches, but if that progress does not continue, we will use the vehicle of introducing legislation in the United States Congress to raise our voices and make it clear to Cairo that churches need to be allowed to be built. But it is not enough to allow churches to be built. They have to be protected. That is the number one function of every government. That is the duty that a government owes to its citizens. We applaud President Sisi for being the first to visit the church on Christmas, but we see these terrible acts of May 26th and April 9th. We see the terrible acts of February 2015 in Libya, and we know that the Egyptian government has to do more to protect its citizens. In Egypt, obviously, more difficult to affect Libya. I've had a chance to meet with President Sisi just a month or two ago. His foreign minister I met with separately a month or two before that. And in every meeting, I'm talking about the protection of the Coptic community. Thank you. A community that goes back to St. Mark, a community that is as Egyptian as the Nile. I get assurances, but I need you to let me know what's actually happening on the ground. And the greatest thing that President Sisi has done is dislodge the Muslim Brotherhood from the governance of Egypt. When others, even in my own party, even in the former administration, were talking about democracy, and brotherhood, and this, the Brotherhood believed, of course, in one person, one vote, one time. This was not a democratic movement. This was a movement of oppression. And so what do we do to combat the Muslim Brothers' ideology now? Well, I think the next step is for us to formally list as terrorist organizations two of the Muslim Brotherhood's offspring, Hassam and Liwa al-Thawra. Did I get that?
Yes.
Okay. Good enough so they know what I was saying. They need to be listed as foreign terrorist organizations. Now, of course, while I am dedicated to the Coptic community of Egypt, look at the broader group of religious minorities in the Middle East. That's why I'm a co-sponsor of the Iraq and Syria Genocide Emergency Relief Accountability Act, which we passed in the House just a week or so ago. An important step in branding what is going on in the Middle East toward Christians as genocide. And that's why I co-sponsored HCON Res 75 that uses that same word for that same purpose. I joined with, I believe you heard from my colleague from Michigan, Congressman Trott, earlier, co-sponsored with him the bill back in September of 2015, co-sponsored the bill to establish and push that we actually get appointed a special envoy on religious minorities in the Middle East. So I look forward to working with you. Guido will stay here and talk to a few folks who may want to go into more detail or let me know of specific things that are happening in Egypt. I know how terrible it is in the Sinai, and you'll also get your cards, and if we get your card, we'll keep you informed in the weeks and months to come. Thank you very much.